Very good. So we're starting or continuing. We're on page 64, actually, halfway down, I think, of The Way of the Pilgrim. And as you know, whenever we run into something that he is reading from the Philokalia, I try and find that article or that essay. And so last week we did Saint Peter of Damascus and his 3 points on prayer. And tonight we're going to be back in the actual book of Way of the Pilgrim, catching up with the Pilgrim. And he has been teaching people that he's meeting along the way about his experience. A lot of them are not familiar with the books, with the writings in the Philokalia, and I think you'll find that today even. A lot of people aren't familiar with this text. And I really love it because really what I enjoy about it is the fact that it parallels, Vedantic teaching on meditation and on knowledge. So it's kind of a cool thing to see them paralleling each other in completely different traditions that were formed in with experiments that were done in completely different parts of the world, and coming up with the same methods and teachings. And I find that stuff so, I don't know, it excites me. I think having the religions reinforce each other is a fantastic occurrence, a really interesting thing. And I feel like Mother's really up to something with it, because it just seems so obvious at this point. And it's something that at no other point in my life have I even imagined was true. And when I started this investigation about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess it was, I thought it was going to be a very difficult undertaking, and that it was quite dubious, that I thought I was going to have to twist a lot of, what do they call that? Text torturing in order to get the ideas to line up. But when I first started, you just read it with that idea in your mind, and it just opens the doors. It becomes clear that this is the underlying truth. This oneness of religions is something that Thakur intends to bring into the world, did bring into the world, but is continuing to grow and develop. And so I'm very excited. I'm not really accustomed to thinking things in religion can be new. But I've been proved completely wrong on that. It's always new. Always different things pop up in there and just reveal these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful underlying truths that just make it almost magical that this is the nature of things. How difficult life can get on the surface when we live in the mind and when we live in our thoughts, how difficult life can get, and how amazing it is to see that that's unnecessary, that just below the surface of the thinking lies this beautiful stillness, this inner peace that's famously quoted as the peace that passes all understanding. And we sometimes think, oh, they're just saying it can't be understood. Well, no, think about what he's saying. It passes all understanding. It goes beyond understanding. This is that peace of the Ananda, the peace of the bliss within, that is always present, but is beyond thought. It's past the understanding. It isn't held in the mind or in reasoning. It's self-aware, self-apparent, self-obvious, as it were. And I suspect we're looking for, well, not looking for, we are looking for, and that's why we haven't found it, because it's a being situation. You see, what we're trying to develop in ourselves, or trying to learn, is a new kind of knowing, a knowing that's not referential through the mind, a knowing that's not relative between sense objects, a knowing that isn't compartmentalized by the senses, but a knowing that's outside of time, for one. I know it's a weird thing to say, but a knowing that's outside of time, and a knowing that's spontaneous, to us simply because of our being, because of what we are. And some of the things I shared and we've talked about to some extent, that notion that this idea of talking to yourself in your mind when you're trying to work out a problem or think something through, it's becoming more and more clear to me that really almost all of my thinking is entertainment. That's the value of it, because the talker in your mind and the listener in your mind are the same. So what is the talker going to tell the listener that's new? There's nothing. And so it's a matter of letting go of the process and just knowing something, having it instantly available as part of your being. And Sri Nisargadatta talks about that. Ramana Maharshi talks about that. They talk about having this spontaneous knowledge where, for the enlightened soul, the person who has learned to live with separate from thought, separate from mind, and separate from body, for that person, everything that is necessary for navigating the moment perfectly is available to you in the moment itself, in the I am itself. And so, this part of jnana, this part of knowing, it's so difficult because we keep trying to use our conventional tools of ignorance, which means querying the mind, arranging philosophies, understanding points. We put it in front of our senses and study it, and that's how we gain knowledge, because we're accustomed to that worldly knowledge, the knowledge that stays compartmentalized and related and relational in the mind. And I know that it's important because it is, I believe, one of the very first things that Ramakrishna teaches M, about worldly knowledge. He tells him that there's a different one. When M says, "Oh, my wife is ignorant," he says, "Oh, and you have knowledge. Knowledge is to know that God alone is real and that all that is changing is unreal. That's real knowledge." And so that points at this this spontaneous knowing that doesn't happen in the mind. So a very different understanding of ignorance. So I'm looking forward to the studies as we go, especially in the morning class on Sri Nisargadatta, to see if we can suss that out. And here he's moving into this territory also in his prayer. His prayer is starting to get quite deep. All right. So he was talking to that couple earlier. He had was talking to them around their table. He had healed her of her sickness, or of the bone that she had swallowed, and gotten that to release. And then everybody wanted to come and be healed by him. So he left that place, and he came across two more folks that have asked some questions. And he says there, "You see, this way of ceaseless prayer is simple and easy and within reach of everybody, so long as he has some amount of human feeling." They were extraordinarily pleased with this. My host took me in his arms and thanked me again and again. This is that very pious couple, right, that has been taking people into their home and helping them. And he's passed through this town, and they've begged him to stay for dinner, meet my husband. Oh, here are the kids. So he's kind of getting entangled in their business a little bit. And he keeps having that inspiration to get away and to get into prayer. But so far he's put that off and has spent more time with them. So the host takes me in his arms and thanks me again and again. Then he looked at my Philokalia, saying, "I must certainly buy myself a copy of this. I will get it at once from Petersburg. But for the moment, and in memory of this occasion, I will copy out the passage you have just read. You read it out to me." And then and there he wrote it out beautifully. Then he exclaimed, "Why, goodness me, of course. I have an icon of the Damascene, that's St. Peter of Damascus. It was probably of St. John, probably of St. John Damascene." He picked up a frame, put what he had written behind the glass, and hung it beneath the icon. "There," said he, "the living word of the saint underneath this picture will often remind me to put his wholesome advice into practice." You see how he just did something that we talk about all the time. Did you catch it? He came up with a way of reminding himself of something very important in spiritual life on a regular basis. So he's written this thing out now by hand, and then he's put it under the picture of Saint John the Damascene, and has created for himself a memory icon. Something like we were talking about, putting strings on your fingers or rubber bands around your wrist or whatever you can come up with. It's up to you to figure out, how is it that you forget God during the day, that you forget the presence, that you forget the bliss? How is it that you forget that who you are during the day? And to try and put up little helps wherever you can, to help keep your mind reminded somewhere where you always pass. You put a big red dot on the hall in the kitchen or something, so that you always walk by. Oh, there's that red dot. Oh, God. After this, we went to supper. As before, the whole household, men and women, sat down to table with us. How reverently silent and calm the meal was. This is what it's like eating in the monastery. There's a kind of a funny story. I don't know if Greg remembers it, but I was a real dinner party aficionado before I joined, before I stumbled into spiritual life. And I remember in the monastery, eating at the dinner table when nobody was talking, made me produce so much anxiety in me, because the number one dinner party rule around the world is that conversation never stops. You have to keep that conversation interesting, and everybody has to be engaged, and everybody has to be taken care of. And so to be the host, you're always running around, trying to keep all of the spinning plates in the air for that. And eating in the monastery was such a nerve-wracking experience for me, because I kept trying to keep the conversation going. And the monks at the table, the brothers at the table, they weren't interested in keeping the conversation going. And I didn't get it. I didn't. I mean, to me, you couldn't eat in silence with a group. That would just be rude. And so I remember one time after the meal, Greg finally one time said to me, bro, you don't have to talk all the time.
There's another one long ago when I was at the retreat in Olima. We used to have retreatants that would come and stay. Women had their own building. The men would stay kind of with us. And there was a man that had come there for the first time, and he was eating a meal with the monks at the monastery. And we were all very quiet. And he looked around and he said, "Is everything okay?" He just had never experienced this, like you say. He'd never experienced a meal with many people and no one talking.
Yeah. No, it's funny for me to even have this conversation, because now it's so normal. It's such a normal thing. But back then, it was so odd and so uncomfortable to sit there in silence. It just shows you a worldly mind craves that distraction, that constant noise. Because when we don't know what lies underneath, we're afraid of what lies underneath. We're afraid that, oh my God, the depression is there, the unhappiness is there, the difficult questions about life are there, the things I'm insecure about are there. And so we try to stay in that vibrating mind, to stay away from all of those danger topics about our inner self that we're not familiar with. And that's one of the beautiful things from the divine, for me anyway, is the safety of silence, the safety of who you are, that you are in a world, in a universe whose foundation is love and wisdom and existence. And to come to know that slowly through spiritual practice, through scripture, through gurus, through meeting wonderful holy people, and starting to realize that there is a profound love behind all of this, regardless of what it looks like to the mind and body in all of their contortions, that the underlying factor of the universe is peace and love. It's hard to see and it's hard to find, because we're always looking at it from the perspective of a body or from the perspective of a mind. and not from the perspective of our true self, the soul within, which is where we see with clarity, where we see something in universal natures and not getting caught up in the particulars of everything. And so here we have him sitting at this dinner table, and he says how reverently silent and calm the meal was. And at the end of it all, and at the end of it, we all, the children as well, spent a long while in prayer. I was asked to read Akathist to Jesus, the Heart's Delight. Afterwards, the servants went away to bed, and we three were left alone in the room. Then the lady brought me a white shirt and a pair of stockings. I bowed down at her feet and said, "The stockings, little mother, I will not take. I have never worn them in my life. We are always so used to onuchi." Wait, there's a footnote coming here. Onuchi, long strips of material, generally coarse linen, which the Russian peasant wraps around his feet and legs instead of wearing stockings. Okay, so something sort of like a bandage, but it's I've seen actually that in some of those medieval pictures where they have a strip of cloth that they wrapped around their feet and most of the way up their calf.
That was a true footnote.
Yeah, true footnote. Very good. That was a great dad joke. So, so the lady brought. Now, this is interesting too that he doesn't accept it. This is something I've learned from the master also, and from just reading some of the spiritual literature, particularly that story about the sadhu that was walking in the rain to a village, and a public bus, the driver stops and asks him if he wants a ride, because it was pouring rain outside, and he would give him a free ride if he wanted. And the sadhu asked him, "Will you come this way the same time tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after?" And the bus driver was like, "Well, I can't guarantee that." And he said, "Well, then I will walk, but thank you for your offer." Because he knew, if you take the ride once, then the next day, if it's raining and the ride doesn't come, you miss the ride. Whereas if you had never taken the ride in the first place, you wouldn't miss it. And that's important for keeping our life from doing that creep, where we just keep owning more and more and more and accumulating more and more and more, because we don't hold ourselves at a level. I'm learning a lot of that right now, in a happy way, in a great way, not having to settle, but just being outside of the monastery and having, living here, and just always the mind is coming up with little things that would make this more comfortable, or that would be easier to do that, or I'd feel better this way. Having my roommate has offered me the use of his car anytime that I want it. And I told him that no, that would be all right, because if I started using his car, I would be used to having a car. And then if that car wasn't there, or he wasn't there, or I moved elsewhere and was without a car, I would have this nagging need for a car, a desire for a car. But having lived here now for this time without a car, I've learned all the bus schedules. I know how to get from here to Denver, from here to Boulder. I know where the bus stops are. I know when the buses come. And if that's your life and you've settled into that, that works. There's no unhappiness in it. There's no compromise in it. If you learn to live at the level that you're at and learn to maintain it, and not take things that are above it or that are beyond it, and just keep yourself simple, keep yourself consciously simple in that sense, spiritual life goes much better for us. That story, all for the sake of a loincloth, where the sadhu ends up with an entire ranch just to support his loincloth. The story goes, just in a quick summary, he had a loincloth, but there was a rat in the cave that he lived in that kept chewing holes in his loincloth. And so he complained to the devotees. And of course, the devotees wanted to be helpful, so they went and got him a cat to chase away the rat. And so the cat was living there, and he kept the rat away, and it was perfect. He had his loincloth with no holes in it. But then the cat got hungry, and he's like, "I don't have anything to feed the cat with." And so then somebody brought some milk for him. And then one of the devotees said, well, we shouldn't have to bring you milk all the time. Let's just give him a cow. Give him a cow. So they gave him a cow, to produce the milk, to feed the cat, so the cat could chase away the rat, so the rat wouldn't eat his loincloth. And so, as the story goes, in the end, the sadhu's guru comes and sees him and sees that he owns this vast ranch with all of these cattle and all of these things. And he says to him, he says, what happened to you? I gave you your mantra, told you to do your practice. I leave and I come back and you've got an entire, and the sadhu was like, oh, and he told him the whole story. And so the guru looks around at this and just marvels and says, all of this for the sake of a kalpina, for the sake of a loincloth, and that's how life is. That's the danger of Maya. If we're not living consciously, Maya puts a hook in our nose, and she'll have you owning all kinds of things, have you running around, mowing lawns, fixing gardens, painting houses, vacuuming vast rooms. She'll have the whole thing arranged for you. So be on constant guard. Accept your life as it is and maintain it as it is. And if you have opportunities to make it simpler, do that, but do whatever you can not to have it get more complex, not to own more and more things, not to get bigger and bigger houses, better cars, blah, 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 blah. Keep it KISS, keep it simple, stupid. That's the word there. So he rejects these stockings, though given to him unasked, rejects them, saying, no, I'm accustomed to these and I'll stick with that. Thank you. Because where was he going to get his next pair of stockings, right? So I bowed down at her feet and said, the stockings, little mother, I will not take. I have never worn them in my life. We are always so used to these onuchi. She hurried off and brought back her old kaftan of thin yellow material and cut it up into 2 onuchi, while her husband, saying, and look, the poor fellow's footwear is almost worn out, brought me his new bashmaki. Okay, bashmaki is a kind of shoe, large ones, which he wore over his top boots. Then he told me to go into the next room, which was empty, and change my shirt. I did so, and when I came back to them again, they sat me down on a chair to put on my new footwear, wrapping my feet and legs in the new onochi, and she putting on the bashmaki. At first, I would not let them, but they bade me to sit down, saying, sit down and be quiet. Christ washed his disciples' feet. There was nothing to do but obey. And I began to weep, and so did they. After this, the lady went to bed with the children and her husband, and I went to a summer house in the garden. So what a wonderful play of love there. Them desperately wanting to take care of him resisting from his own ideal as a sadhu, and then realizing that if he was resisting and pushing against their offer too hard, that was egotistical. And them reminding him of Christ allowing the prostitute to wash his feet, and to allow that the other disciples allowed Jesus to wash their feet. So that there is a place and a time for accepting service, and that it's just as egotistical to push it away, with too much reserve as it is to accept it without pushing away. So one has to watch the mind closely and know when the pushing should happen and when the pushing should cease. Sit down and be quiet. Christ washed his disciples' feet. There was nothing to do but obey, and I began to weep, and so did they. And after this, the lady went to bed with the children and her husband, and I went to a summer house in the garden. For a long while, we did not go to sleep, but lay talking. He began in this way. Now, in God's name and on your conscience, tell me the real truth. Who are you? You must be of good birth, and you are only assuming a disguise of simplicity. You read and write well, you speak correctly and are able to discuss things, and these things do not go with peasant upbringing. I spoke the real truth with a sincere heart, both to you and to your wife, when I told you about my birth. And I never had a thought of lying or deceiving you. Why should I? As for the things I say, they are not my own, but what I have heard from my departed starets, or my guru, who was full of divine wisdom, or what I have gathered from a careful reading of my holy fathers. But my ignorance has gained more light from interior prayer than from anything else, and that I have not reached by myself. It has been granted me by the mercy of God and by the teaching of my guru, of my starets. So we see this wonderful thing here. Did you hear that statement? That I learned more of all of this from my practice of interior prayer than from anything else. So he's learning more from his practice than he does from his guru or from his reading. And that, I think, is a healthy spiritual life. When you're learning more from living, learning more from the memory and constant remembrance of the divine presence, and by sitting in that silence within, learning by being open, by having nothing in the mind that's clouding you and separating you from the presence of the beloved, which is everything around you, which is this entire everything, you included, are surrounded and in the company of this divine being, of this master. And that if you can silence your own ego, silence your own noise, your own personal space, if you can surrender that white picket fence you've built around yourself, saying this is mine and that's yours, if you can do that, this is where the learning really begins to happen. This is where the ego really ripens, and that it becomes vijnani, where you have drunk the milk, so you know the taste of milk. You've been burned by the fire. you know the heat of the fire in a personal way. And that he's fully understanding that he's been given all of this, which is a very healthy thing to remember as a spiritual seeker. As you grow in wisdom and as you grow in love, people will naturally be attracted to you. But what is it that they're attracted to? They're attracted to the wisdom and the love. Was that always yours? Was that always manifesting in you? No. So what are they interested in? They're interested in that divine spark within, right? And so it is very beneficial for us as we grow as people, and we people begin to try and give us stockings and shoes, that we always remember that we have been given freely through God's grace, God's mercy, everything that we have, so that we don't grow our own ego. We don't give our ego food to increase its pride of life, its pride of living. And so we stay humble in it. And you see how how God can work through somebody, take a peasant and turn them into a king, make everybody suspect that this person must be from a high birth, or this person must be well educated, or this, that, or the other, but he always very proudly proclaimed his true self. No, I'm an ignorant peasant. I have nothing of my own. Everything has been given to me. It is by the grace of God and from my practice, from my walking with God, that I have learned all of this. But my ignorance has gained more light from interior prayer than from anything else, and that I have not reached myself. And that I have not reached by myself. It has been granted me by the mercy of God and by the teaching of my starets. And that can be done by anyone. It costs nothing but the effort to sink down in silence into the depths of one's heart and call more and more upon the radiant name of Jesus. All right, so there's the method we've been seeing. As he does that prayer, that mantra that he was given by his guru, as we do our prayers with our mantras from our gurus, we sink down deeper and deeper into the heart, outside of the mind, leaving the mind. We occupy the mind with the mantra to keep it busy so that it doesn't distract our attention, right? And we follow the mantra. We pay attention not this is a tricky one too. If we pay attention not to the name as it's been going through our mind, not through the rote words going through the mind, but to the form that they indicate. The name and the form can never be separated. So that's why the Guru says that when you say your mantra, God is present, because God and the mantra are one and the same. And that's been some wonderful fun, actually, taking just that statement and imagining while I'm saying the name, while I'm repeating the mantra, to try and understand how is the name and the form the same, and what are the implications of God being present in me right now, which I can know to be true because the mantra is happening. And it's that kind of knowing and that kind of observing and that kind of understanding that allow us to drop down into the heart and to find the silence of the mind. Everyone who does that feels at once the inward light. All right, there's a promise to you. Everyone who does that feels at once this inward light. Right? This inward love. Light and love, according to Eckhart Tolle, the same thing. So the light that's within you, when you dream at night and you're in that dream and you're seeing things, how are you seeing those things? There's no light there. There's no physical light happening. So that's the love. That's the native light within you, the native consciousness, the light of consciousness that's reflecting off of mind. It's the same light, actually, that we pick up in the world. We just draw a different source for it. But Eckhart Tolle says when he had that enlightenment experience, he said, I tell you the truth, I saw that light and love, not metaphorically, but actually are the same thing. And that's beautiful, because there's always light. Even in your darkest center of self, there's that light of consciousness. And so to come and feel, take notice of that inward light. When you see in your mind, notice the light and think, wow, what is the source of this light in the dark of my mind? Where does this come from? And know that it is the native love given to you by the divine, by God, that light is God, that light is love, and love is God. So these are ways that we can come in a practical way to this understanding of the intimacy that we have with the beloved. Even me in this room right now, I just see the whole room is lit up. Love is everywhere present. And I look in every one of your rooms, it's the same. There's light everywhere. The light of the divine is everywhere present. God is always demonstrating love, always offering love. And so when we sit and recognize that by chanting the name, by allowing the presence to become the focus of our attention, we will immediately become aware of this inner light, he says. Everyone who does that feels at once the inward light. Everything becomes understandable to him. This is that divine knowledge that we're talking about, this intuitive, non-referential knowledge, this knowledge that exists because of being. Right? Because of being. Everything becomes understandable to him. He even catches sight in this light of some of the mysteries of the kingdom of God. And what depth and light there is in the mystery of a man coming to know that he has this power to plumb the depths of his own being, to see himself from within, to find delight in self-knowledge, to take pity on himself and to shed tears of gladness over his fall and his spoiled will, to show good sense in dealing with things, and to talk with people in no hard matter, and lies within anyone's power, for the mind and the heart were there before the learning and the human wisdom. If the mind is there, you can set it to work either upon science or upon experience. But if the mind is lacking, then no teaching, however wise, and no training will be of any good. The trouble is that we live far from ourselves and have but little wish to get any nearer to ourselves. What an interesting statement. We live so far away from ourselves, right? We get so distracted and so caught up in the world of the mind, the world of the changing. We get so far away from the still and silent child within. We get so far away from that peace that's native to us, purely through our existence, through our being. So we get so distracted and get carried so far away. And then we have to work so hard to find our way back. Indeed, we are running away all the time to avoid coming face to face with our real selves. And we barter the truth for trifles. This is interesting. Let's talk about this for a minute. We are running away all the time to avoid coming face to face with our real selves. Why would that be?
Is it the fear of just disappearing?
Could be the fear of disappearing, fear of non-existence. Yeah, we could, because we're identified with things that move. And when they stop moving, we step out of mind. Yes, the ego disappears, the small self begins disappearing. Absolutely.
It's because it's when you see that interior space, when it kisses you and you need it's hard to not go blind. You feel like you're gonna go blind. Like it's a supercharge that the human body cannot hold on to. It feels like it's gonna just disappear into a trillion pieces. So like I don't know how we can even sustain that space.
Yeah, well, no, it's interesting because as you're talking about it, I remember Ramakrishna says, that how I can't remember all the pieces. He talks about that the divine is just an ocean of nectar, and he said when he asked Vivekananda, well, when you are confronted with that knowledge of this ocean of divine nectar within, what are you going to do? And Vivekananda says, oh, I'll go down carefully to the edge and pick it up with my hands and drink it, safely. And Ramakrishna says, well, why wouldn't you dive in? He says, oh, I might drown. He says, what? This is the ocean of consciousness. How can you become unconscious? Dive in, drink deeply, of this ocean. So jump in. So yes, there's the fear of that. There's also the shame of our lack of inner integrity, right? We have to face the lies that we've built our life on, the inaccuracies that we've built our existence on. We have to face those. We have to face the things that are out of balance in ourselves. I'm getting this idea from the story of Adam and Eve, that they did what they knew they shouldn't do, which is always the case. We never do something wrong, without knowing. It's like there's always some knowing inside where we purposely turn out the lights for a moment so we can do our wrong thing and then turn them back on and keep going. But all of that wrong living, all of that ignorance inside leaves its mark. And that's why we get caught up in the world, because the distraction of the world saves us from having to face the weakness and the failures of our own self within. And the problem with that is very plain and clear. Distraction cannot heal. Distraction, when it's finished, leaves you exactly where you were when you picked it up. So you're always in trouble. And it gets even worse because you get into a catch-22 loop, which means the problem of distracting yourself from truth becomes the reason you distract yourself from truth. You see, it becomes a vicious cycle. You have to keep hiding as you insist on going the same distance. But, underneath it all, there's an ignorance behind it as well, because we don't know what's down there. We don't know who we are because we're making it all up. We've created a full description of ourselves in our mind. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm an Indian, I'm an American, I'm gay, I'm straight, I'm tall, I'm short, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm rich, I'm poor, I'm great, I'm insignificant. All these definitions of things that change is how we've defined ourselves. And so when somebody says, go find out who you are, that sounds ridiculous because you're like, oh, I know who I am. And you start saying, I'm a 58-year-old man and blah, blah, blah. But then you realize I haven't been 58 for most of my life, for all of my life, actually. I haven't been a man my whole life. It's like I haven't had a computer degree my whole life. And yet these are the things that I use to describe me. But who am I before I'm a college graduate, before I'm a family member, before I'm a baby? What is it to be what we are? See, we don't know, so we can't take refuge in it. And that's why it's quite wonderful to come up with an idea that we're Satchitananda, that's what we are. When nobody else is telling us, when nothing else is being asked, that voice inside says, I'm love, I'm wisdom, I am existence itself. And so coming to know that, we learn slowly to trust it, right? We learn slowly to accept it. We're like a wounded street dog, that won't go near anybody because it's been beaten and taken advantage of so much. And then that one kind-hearted person comes along and he bites that person, but that person stays. That person doesn't run away. The person continues to bring food. And you can see this story on YouTube if you want. But that whole process, and in the end, the dog is beautiful. All his fur is grown back. His tail is up and wagging. He's smiling and happy, and he's out playing ball with his new companion. And that is the mapping out of spiritual life. Actually, all of us are street dogs. We've been abused, we've suffered, we've gone through so much pain. We don't believe in God, we don't believe in religion, we don't trust people. Everything is a matter of safety. And now, you're coming along, you're doing your practice, and this name, this presence within is trying to approach, and you kind of shying away, I'm not sure about this. Then you stop doing your practice for a while, and then you miss it, and you go back and try again. And you're like, no, well, there's something here. All right, I'll stick with it a little bit more. And like, oh, wait, something's getting out. No, I don't know. This is getting too intense, and we shy away again. But ultimately we learn because it's love behind it. And ultimately we grow our hair back. Anyway, it goes on like that. Indeed, we are all running away all the time to avoid coming face to face with our real selves. And we barter the truth for trifles. Bartering the truth means we exchange our awareness for ignorance. We exchange our awareness for drunkenness. We exchange for highs and for all these other things in the world. We exchange our sobriety, our isness, our experience of the moment for an experience of pleasure, something that's painted over the moment. We think, I would very gladly take an interest in spiritual things and in prayer, but I have no time. The fuss and cares of life give no chance for such a thing. Yet, which is really important and necessary, salvation and the eternal life of the soul and the fleeting life of the body on which we spend so much of our labor, is that I spoke of, that leads to either sense or stupidity in people, right? We all have the same amount of time in a day. All of us do. We've all given 24 hours. So one person to have time for spiritual life and the other person doesn't. It's not that you don't have time. You've chosen not to spend your time on it because we all have 24 hours. It's your choice. You have time for everything that you want to have time for. And you don't have time for the things you don't want to have time for. And that's the part of ourselves, that's the hard truth about facing ourselves, is coming to those truths. Because all of us live our life like victims. Oh, I didn't mean it. Oh, I'm trying. Oh, it's so hard. Oh, I'm so busy. All of us are victimized, and the power lies like in Vivekananda, at the end of his life, he said, you know what, everything that I did was poisoned by a certain amount of ego. Everything good that I did came directly from the Lord. He's like, he really gives a brutally honest accounting of his experience of his life, and he owns his dirt. He owns it, but he knows that it's irrelevant in the face of the divine. And he lays it with that it was grace that gave him everything, and it was grace that he leaves behind for all of us in that. All right, so don't be afraid to be honest about yourself, because of the grace of God, not because you're a great person. Don't be afraid to face God, not because you're an awesome person, you're a great devotee with an incredible practice, but because of the love of God. You see, a healthy life is not lived on our ideas of ourself, our attributes of ourself. A great life is lived on the inspiration of pure love, the love of the divine that comes through us and allows us to be what we become, allows us to express what we express. And knowing that love of God, knowing that grace, is what allows us to let go of our karma also. It's impossible for the mind to allow you to escape your own karma without the idea of grace. The mind will make you pay down to the last penny, but grace will set you free. And so it's important that we spend time with the source of this grace, that self, that inner knowing, that light within, that solitude, that stillness. Forgive me, dear brother. I ask not just out of mere curiosity, but from friendliness and from Christian sympathy, and even more because about 2 years ago, I came across a case which gave rise to the question I put forward to you. It was like this. There came to our house a certain beggar with a discharged soldier's passport. He was old and feeble, and so poor that he was almost naked and barefoot. He spoke little, and in such a simple way that you would take him for a peasant of the steppes. We took him into the guest house, but some 5 days later he fell seriously ill, and so we moved him to this very summer house, where we kept him quiet. And my wife and I looked after him and nursed him. But after a while, it was plain that he was nearing his end. We prepared him for it and sent for our priest for his confession, communion, and anointing. The day before he died, he got up and asked me for a sheet of paper and a pen, and begged me to shut the door and to let no one in while he wrote his will, which he desired me to send after his death to his son at an address in Petersburg. I was astounded when I saw him write, for not only did he write a beautiful and absolutely cultured hand, but the composition was also excellent, thoroughly correct, and showing great delicacy of touch. In fact, I'll read you that will of his tomorrow. I have a copy of it. All this set me wondering and aroused my curiosity enough to ask him about his origin and his life. After making me solemnly vow not to reveal it to anyone until after his death, he told me for the glory of God the story of his life. I was Prince X, he began. I was very wealthy and led a most luxurious and dissipated life. After the death of my wife, my son and I lived together, he being happily settled in a military service. He was a captain in the guards. One day when I was getting ready to go to a ball at an important person's house, I was very angry with my valet. Unable to control my temper, I struck him a severe blow on the head and ordered him to be sent away to his village. This happened in the evening, and the next morning the valet died from the effect of the blow. This did not affect me very seriously. I regretted my rashness, but soon forgot the whole thing. 6 weeks later, though, I began seeing the dead valet in my dreams, and to begin with, every night he disturbed me and reproached me, incessantly repeating, "Conscienceless man, you are my murderer." As time went on, I began seeing him when I was awake also, wide awake. His appearances grew more and more frequent with the lapse of time, till the agitation he caused me became almost constant. And in the end, he did not appear alone, but I saw at the same time other dead men whom I had treated very badly, and the women whom I had seduced. They all reproached me ceaselessly and gave me no peace, to such an extent that I could neither sleep nor eat or do anything else. My strength grew utterly exhausted, and my skin stuck to my bones. All the efforts of skilled physicians were of no avail at all. I went abroad for a cure, but after trying it for 6 months, I was not benefited in the slightest degree, and those torturing apparitions grew steadily worse and worse. I was brought home again, more dead than alive. I went through the horrors and tortures of hell in the fullest measure. I had proof then that hell exists, and I knew what it meant. While I was in this wretched condition, I recognized my own wrongdoing. I repented, and I made my confession. I gave all my serfs their freedom, and took a vow to afflict myself for the rest of my days with as toilsome a life as possible, and to disguise myself as a beggar. I wanted, because of all my sin, to become the humblest servant of people of the very lowest station in life. No sooner had I resolutely come to this decision that those disturbing visions of mine ceased. I felt such comfort and happiness from having made my peace with God that I cannot adequately describe it. But just as I had been through hell before, so now I experienced paradise and learned that what that meant also, and how the kingdom of God is revealed in our hearts. I soon got perfectly well again and carried out my intention, leaving my native land secretly, furnished with a discharged soldier's passport. And now, for the last 15 years, I have been wandering about the whole of Siberia. Sometimes I hire myself out to the peasants for such work as I can do. Sometimes I find sustenance by begging in the name of Christ. What blessedness and what happiness and what peace of mind I enjoy in the midst of all these privations. It can be felt to the full only by one who, by the mercy of the great intercessor, has been brought out of hell and into paradise. When he came to the end of his story, he handed me the will to forward to his son, and on the following day he died. And I have a copy of that will in my wallet lying on my Bible. If you would like to read it, I will get it for you now. Here you are. I unfolded it and read thus: In the name of God, the glorious Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, my dearest son. It is 15 years now since you saw your father, but though you have no news of him, he has from time to time found means to hear of you and cherished a father's love for you. That love impels him to send you these few lines from his deathbed. May they be a lifelong lesson to you. You know how I suffered for my careless and thoughtless life, but you do not know how I have been blessed in my unknown pilgrimage and filled with joy in the fruits of repentance. I die at peace in the house of one who has been good to me, and to you also, for kindness showered upon the Father must touch the feeling heart of a grateful son. Render to him my gratitude in any way you can. In bestowing on you my paternal blessing, I adjure you to remember God, to guard your conscience. Be prudent, kindly, and considerate. Treat your inferiors as benevolently and amiably as you can. Do not despise beggars and pilgrims, remembering that only in beggary and pilgrimage did your dying father find rest and peace for his tormented soul. I invoke God's blessing upon you and calmly close my eyes in the hopes of life eternal, through the mercy of the great intercessor for men, our Lord Jesus Christ, your Father, X. What a wonderful resolution in a story. That's, you see the story he just told you, and the process that that man just bore witness to is how we find our way back to that inner peace, to that inner paradise. Now, just like Brother Lawrence, we see what we've done wrong. We change. we find the inspiration and we move on. We don't mull it over and over and over, right? We resolve to make right what we can and to do right with what we have. And so that is the story hidden in the story of this man. So I'm going to come back to that next week because it is now 8 o'clock. Is there any questions or concerns or confusions? Wonderful. Yeah.